We are joined with a special guest, Dr. Ryan Wong, who's a lecturer at Northumbria University and one of the contributing authors for the Methane Abatement Handbook. This presentation will cover Chapter 11, so you can take a look at the handbook for more details. Let's go to the next slide. The handbook text is available both in English as well as several languages on the website listed on the screen. And the process itself for the handbook, well, first of all, I wanted to thank our funder, the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Energy Resources, for funding and supporting the handbook, as well as all of the methane abatement work that CLDP is conducting. The book itself was drafted over an intense 1 week, and Dr. Wong, along with 12 other experts, came together. And the experts really provide a diverse perspective. You have governments, NGOs, multilaterals, industry, and academia all participating in the handbook. So I do encourage you to take a look at that. And with that, Dr. Wong, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Priya. So there are a number of key takeaways for this chapter 11 on financing. First is that methane solutions have one of the highest emission reduction benefits per dollar of capital invested, but it is definitely underfunded globally. We need sufficient finance flows towards methane abatement in the oil and gas sector to help reduce emissions. And methane opportunity needs to be realized with investment in technical solutions and what we call enabling activities. Ineffective financing of this soft cost rather than the hard cost to governments could be a significant bottleneck, and we'll talk about that. Financing sources include development finance institutions, DFIs, we'll call them. There are climate-specific funding mechanisms, and also green bond issuers, the three types of financing sources there. Global methane pledge may contribute to the integration of methane abatement into the climate finance architecture. Couple more points. Methane emissions are a form of waste, but without a GHG, the greenhouse gas price, not all sources are cost effective for companies to fix or prevent. Some companies might only voluntarily use previously wasted methane that provides the most attractive investment opportunity. And in many countries, governments will need regulation to drive methane reduction action. Okay, let's get into the details. So first of all is to understand that there is a big financing gap. So methane abatement measures are in general underfunded severely. Methane abatement has received only less than 2% of the total climate finance flows, and just 11 billion US dollars for methane abatement was allocated in 2020. More than 100 billion is needed, and that's at least 10 times of the current levels. Now, the fossil fuel sector has the highest potential for mitigation, but it receives the least amount of finance. What needs to be financed? Infrastructure and what we call enabling environment, right? So infrastructure being the hard cost, enabling the environment being the soft cost. So we shouldn't be forgetting financing for the soft costs. Infrastructure is something that you probably understand very well: upgrades to existing production, equipment, gas capture projects, services. But for soft costs, you also have to think about new standards development, gas market regulation, contract terms, training. All of those need financing. Where could financing come from? Development finance institutions, DFIs, and these are highly developmentally focused. They have government policy objectives to support them. They often require comprehensive environmental and social conditions. These institutions offer long-term loans, the coverage for default, and they add transparency to the processes of financing, which is great. They may be willing to take on more technical risk for emerging technologies than your usual financing institutions. Some examples here: multilateral, bilateral, national, subnational DFIs. We have more details in the handbook itself. The second source of financing would be dedicated climate funds, and these climate funds are able to deploy low carbon technologies quite rapidly, and often these technologies are renewable technologies. Some examples of climate funds: Green Climate Fund, which is a famous one that you probably know of; a Global Environment Facility you probably have heard of; Global Methane Hub; Climate Investment Funds. And they can offer below market rates, which is concessional financing, that reduces financing cost, the cost to the financing processes. Global Methane Hub has provided direct funding for methane abatement projects, and it has raised some 340 million US dollars. Okay, again, there are all kinds of climate-specific funding mechanisms that you can find in our handbook. Some other types, sources of financing: export credit agencies. They promote countries' goods and services. They support transactions for methane abatement goods and services that are imported from the agency's country, and they provide insurance, guarantees of payments, commercial and political risk coverage. And then there is another source: is, yes, the oil and gas companies themselves. Exactly. So there are several companies that are already dedicating a big portion of their capital budgets to reducing methane. National oil companies, they redirect a share of their profits and as a conduit for public financial support. They understand very well that these opportunities for methane abatement because they themselves are operators and they are also partners. All right. We also see financing coming from commercial banks, certainly, and equity funds. And these financing institutions will evaluate the projects on whether it's going to bring in money or not, commercial viability. Like any other projects, other than the methane abatement projects. There are many lenders that have what we call ESG goals, and that the lenders also may be particularly quick at getting revenue streams through carbon credits, for example, or tax rebates. And governments themselves provide funds, especially through green bonds. These are government-backed bonds for infrastructure specifically. Canada's Orphan Well program is a good example. But the government funds must compete against some other sort of fiscal spending commitments. Okay. Some trends in financing: we have philanthropy, we have blended finance, so public and private money coming together. We have cooperation between public and private sectors, for example. We have the ESG frameworks. We have the non-traditional kind of approaches that you will be able to see in our handbook. And we have carbon markets, which is a very critical mechanism for financing. Some limits on these financing opportunities. So we have to ask whether governments will keep supporting these financing for methane abatement projects, and if so, how are they going to do that? Under what kind of conditions? For countries that try to secure international development finance for oil and gas projects, you will, expect that there will be more and more scrutiny, right? And often the scrutiny is around how the project will expand oil and gas activities, and whether there is lock-in for future operations and production. And countries that are covering over half of the global gas imports and 1/3 of global gas exports recently called for these minimizing flaring methane and carbon dioxide emissions in the supply chain to the fullest extent that is practical. That's one good thing to know. Okay, so we need to make an economic case for methane. Now, the operators are incentivized to avoid waste, but they are also seeking methane solutions that will yield positive returns. For the regulators, on the other hand, they can make the economic case by thinking that they are helping to identify cost-effective reductions and that they need to streamline the approvals of these solutions. And you will see a lot more about cost-effective solutions in our handbook. Um, still on making an economic case, from the company's perspective, though, so you want companies to reduce methane with a positive net present value, NPV, to the company, and that there is internal rate of return. That means it's a company's investment criterion. From the economics perspective, you want the country to be able to reduce methane with a positive net return, and that it lowers the consumer prices, and it avoids pollution at the same time. From the regulator's perspective, you want to reduce methane with a positive return for public health and the environment. Methane abatement actually can be monetized. So you can sell the gas for domestic consumption. You can produce LNG and LPG if the gas is wet. You can re-inject the gas into an oil and gas reservoir. You can use natural gas for power generation. You can supply feedstock for hydrogen, methanol, and gas to liquid industries. A quick case study for you. Bangladesh provides a really positive example here for the Eldar project. About 65% of the commercial energy in Bangladesh is actually from natural gas. But the distribution network is getting old and it's leaking. So to resolve that issue, Bangladeshi government actually entered a clean development mechanism project with the Titan Gas Transmission and Distribution Company. And this TGT-DCL, the company, reduced 4 million metric tons of CO2 emissions every year. The company actually gained revenue, which is good news, in two ways. By reducing methane leaks through new CDM, which is the funding mechanism, new CDM-funded LDAR, and the saved gas, the not wasted gas, and the sale of the certified emissions reductions have helped them gain revenue. Okay. The project was very successful, and an additional gas distribution companies actually signed CDM-funded methane reduction projects because of this successful case, and primarily LDAR to find and stop leakages. PGCL, this company, also obtained a CDM-funded project with the result of 0.36 million metric ton of CO2 emissions being reduced every year again. Another company followed suit with that amount of metric tons of CO2 emissions in between 2019 and 2022. And the program actually since has been replicated with many other distribution companies. So quite a success. We've got some links for you here if you want to read more about financing resources. Landscape of methane abatement finance, and then the famous Global Methane Hub. A few other ones, Global Methane Initiative Project Network is a good one to check. World Bank Group Green Bond Program, an interesting one, certainly. Financing solutions to reduce natural gas flaring and methane emissions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wong. Again, hope you all take a look at the other recordings as well as the book on Chapter 11 if you have any questions on what Dr. Wong has covered today. And with that, just final thanks to our funder for all of this work, the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Energy Resources. Thank you.